From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon. Hi. Hello, I'm Nancy Gross from the American Folklife Center, and on behalf of the center, I'd like to welcome you to a special presentation in our Benjamin Botkin Folklife Lecture Series. The Botkin series provides a platform for professional folklorists and ethnographers working both in the academy and in the public sector to present findings from their ongoing research. This series allows us to interact with cutting-edge scholars in folklife and cultural heritage today, while at the same time building the collections here at the library for tomorrow. The lectures are an important acquisition project for the center. These presentations are being videotaped, and they'll become part of the permanent collection of the center and will be developed into webcasts and eventually appear on the LC website. Which reminds me, if you have anything that rings or buzzes that you don't want to be immortalized for the ages, now would be an excellent time to turn it off. The Botkin Lecture Series in total helps the American Folklife Center fulfill its mandate to preserve and present the folklife scholarship that is informing and impacting our lives today. I have the honor today of introducing Steve Roud, a folklorist and an indefatigable researcher from the town of Maresfield. Is that right? In East Sussex, England. He was a local studies librarian for the borough of Croydon in London for many years and has served on the committee and as the honorary librarian for the English Folklore Society. About 40 years ago, Mr. Roud started his Folksong Index and Broadside Index as a relatively small-scale project to find English language folk songs in published sources. Over the years, his lists have grown in size and complexity. Today, the Roud Folk Song Index has more than 175,000 entries, and the Roud Broadside Index comprises more than 145,000 references, and both have become major go-to resources for song researchers across the globe. In addition, in his spare time, Mr. Roud is also an expert on numerous other aspects of British traditional culture. His publications include London Lore, The Legends and Traditions of the World's Most Vibrant City, The Lore of the Playground, 100 Years of Children's Games, Rhymes, and Traditions, The English Year, and is this your most recent Monday's Child is Fair of Face?
No, the Playground Lore.
The Playground is, but he also wrote Monday's Child is Fair of Face and Other Traditional Beliefs About Babies and Motherhood. We're delighted that Mr. Roud has made time to come to the library during his recent trip to America, and I ask you to join me in welcoming him for this presentation of Chorus and Verse, the challenges of designing the Roud Folk Song Index. Steve.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. As I said this morning to one of your colleagues, it's very nice to be here because indexes don't get out much. So it's particularly gratifying to see all you people really interested in indexing. So yeah, I'm glad you're here. I should explain that the Folk Song Index started by accident. If I was planning it, if I was going to do it again, I wouldn't do it. So I was born in 1949, which doesn't mean much to some of you, but that meant that I was 13, 14 when the Beatles hit us. So I was that generation. And for some unknown reason, I don't know why. Well, no, I do know why. Everybody does this. I wanted to catalogue my own record collection, as one does. I mean, everybody. Well, I don't know if you still do it with downloads, but in the old days with LPs and 45s and things, 78s, you index your own record collection. And because I had a few books, I indexed my books as well. I mean, my friends didn't quite understand what I was doing, but, you know, that's what you do. And I did that for a while, and then I started buying the sort of music press, you know, the newspapers that specialised in pop music, and I thought I could index them as well. So that's what I did for a while. And then I discovered folk music in about 1970. And I thought, this is much more interesting than pop music. So I threw away my old index, just like that, just overnight. It was on 5x3 index cards. You remember those? Yeah, in shoe boxes, under the bed. My mum used to buy me the 5x3 cards. Once a week she'd buy me a packet of cards. Anyway, enough of that. I then got interested in folk music, and I thought, well, I could start indexing that. So the same 5x3 cards in shoeboxes. But the reason for all this story is that, to tell you that that's how the index started. It started in my bedroom because I wanted to get control, as librarians now call it, control of the data on my records and in my books. And I soon realised that folk songs have different titles. That's the key problem to all of this, is that folk songs don't have an official title. The same song can have different titles. The same title can refer to different songs. So in my index I had to work out a system for coping with that, and I was quite happy in my bedroom, indexing these things. Nobody else needed to care. And then I went to library school in my 30s. I suddenly decided, if I'm doing this, I might as well be a proper librarian. Got a degree in librarianship, and at the same time, the same day, in fact, that I started there, they invented computers, right? And I said, this would be handy, a computer. I could put my cards onto the computer. And then they started giving away computers with serial packets, and I got one at home, and then it was called a database, and then people started wanting to use my database. They heard about my database, and it had 5,000 records in at that time, I think. It was on floppy disks. So I started giving them to people, and then they started paying me occasionally for the postage. But then the trouble started, because as all of you know who have done any indexing at all, you can do your own index quite happily. It's idiosyncratic, your own abbreviation. You had to have abbreviations in those days because computers didn't have much memory space. So all the titles of my books were reduced to, sort of ABFS, meant, American Book of Folk Songs. And I understood that. But when other people started using it, then they didn't understand it. And that's when my real problem started, is when I went public, as it were. And people started saying, well, we don't like this bit, or why don't you do so-and-so, or it hasn't, And then I had a user group. I had people who were using my index, and they had a say in what I did, and they started, some of them gently suggested things, some people complained, and so on. That's life in a library. Anyway, that's how it all started. The point being that it started by accident. It started as an amateur way of dealing with a practical problem. It had no theory. It still has no theory. And that's the problem, is that I'm constantly trying to catch up with if I'd planned it in the first place, as I say. If I'd planned it, if I'd known about being a librarian when I started, I wouldn't have done it in this way. I would have done different things. So two things I want to do today, if we've got time, is to take you through the index so that you will then be expert users and you won't complain because you'll know why something happens or doesn't happen. But I'd also, if I have time at the end, like to point out some of the things that are happening in England, from a folk song point of view, some very exciting things, digitization projects, and making things available around the world, even in America. We'll be able to use the British sources more easily. The index, my folk song index and my broadside index, are now housed by the EFDSS, which is the English Folk Dance and Song Society, or EFDIS for short. As this is being videoed, I'll say, it's a wonderful organisation, because they're going to be checking on me. But EFDIS it's an amateur organisation. It's not government funded. We don't have anything like your wonderful folk life centre here in England, because in England we take no notice of our folklore. It's sort of, we don't have folklore. The Scots and the Irish and the Welsh and foreigners, they have folklore, but the English don't. We don't have any folklore. So there's no government department to look after English folklore. There is hardly any university anymore in England that does folklore as a course. So everything is done by people like myself, amateurs and volunteers. And EFDIS, which covers folk dance and song, and sometimes the dance people talk to the song people, sometimes they don't. It's a sort of arts and scholarship organisation all in one. But it does a good job at the moment. It hasn't done in the past maybe, but at the moment it's great. And hello to my friends in FDIS. They host the index for me, and this is how it looks on the web. I apologise for the colour. I didn't have anything to do with the red. It's a bit garish for an English site, but never mind. And if anybody's interested in the sites that I'm talking about, or some of the others, I've got a handout with the web addresses on, so you don't have to write down all the web addresses if you don't want to. And I can give you those later on. But this is, if you go onto the FDIS website, this is search the Roud folksong index. And when people organising this lecture asked me, is the folksong index spelt as folk song, as 2 words, or as 1 word? I didn't know. I'd never really thought about it. It just sort of, it varies depending on who's writing it down. But apparently up there it says 1 word, folksong. So let's... This just happens to be the first entry in the index. It's not the first one I did, but this is one of the problems that I encounter, is that I've used different programs over the years because they've invented new programs, and if you're working on your own, you don't have support and so on, so you just buy the next program that comes and you hope that the stuff will transfer from one, will go from one program to the other. So this program I was using at this time put things in alphabetical order of the title, which was quite handy. But so Apprentice Boy comes first. Now I've actually done a search here under the title Foggy, because I was trying to find the song called The Foggy Dew, which some of you might know. But of course I forgot that there is a book called The Foggy Dew. So if anybody should have remembered that, I should have done. So this isn't a version of The Foggy Dew. It's in a book called The Foggy Dew. But I'll take you through the different fields. Not all of them, because they're not all particularly interesting. But song title. In folk song studies, the song title is a major pain. Because, as I say, there should be a law, I'm sure Congress could do it, that all song titles should be as they are in my index. There should be a master title for the whole world, but there isn't. Not only does the same song appear under different guises, people use dialect spelling. Some people use dialect spelling because it's a good thing. For instance, the Scots Old Lang Syne, O-U-L-D, Lang Syne. Now, if I translated that into Old Long Since and put it up there, then the Scots would all complain, quite rightly. But if you think about it, there's at least 8 different ways of spelling the word old. O-L-D, O-U-L-D, A-U-L-D, O-L-E, O-L apostrophe, and so on. Now, some of those are good spellings, as I say in Scottish term. Sometimes they are people trying to do an African-American accent, for instance, in some of the spirituals. So it's not the way they've chosen to spell it, it's the way the collector has chosen to spell it, and so on. So spelling is a real problem in that first... So the first field we come across, the song title, is already major problems. In Britain, we've flirted with the idea of master titles, and there is a field which you don't see because I'm not using it, called master title. But then we quickly discovered that we could just about do a master title for England that some of us agreed to, but the same song would have a different master title in America and a different one in Australia and certainly a different one in Scotland. So we would need at least 5 different master titles. So you end up... We won't do master titles. Okay. And just the last thing on that, as a librarian, I really feel that I have to reflect how it is spelt in the book or on the record that I'm indexing. Because somebody working from that book, they don't know how else I have spelt it. So if that was there as Prentice Boy, which it often was, apostrophe, Prentice Boy, that's what I should put in the index. Because somebody working from this particular book looking for other versions will look up Prentice Boy. Do you see what I mean? So even if the book is wrong, you have to reflect what's in the book or on the record. Now, I should have said at the beginning that the index now tries to cover published books, published recordings, unpublished manuscript collections, and unpublished sound recordings. In the English-speaking world, every single folk song in the English-speaking world, in English, is going to be in my index one day. But, you know, you've got to think big, haven't you? But anyway, this happens to be an English book. So tune is there for the second field is when there's a named tune. For instance, broadsides often say, to the tune of the Foggy Dew. So if it's a named tune, because some people are looking for that. The third field, first line, is Hannah said a lot of people don't bother with that. Now, I'm quite pleased that I did think of putting in first lines, because with folk songs, if you've just got a title of a song, if it's a bit better than As I Roved Out or something like that, but normally with a folk song, if you've got the title, you can be 50% sure what song it is, you know, roughly. But if you've got the title and the first line, it goes up to about 75%. I mean, it doesn't always work, but the first line is very time consuming, and a lot of other indexes don't do that, but I do recommend it because it is very handy. The next field, type. So that just tells you that this is a book rather than a sound recording, because you might be just searching, as often people do, for an audio version. You might just want audio, you might just want printed. So that field, type, will say book, sound recording, broadside, manuscript, that sort of thing. Source, this is a book by Frank Purslow called The Foggy Dew, and under it, bibliography ref. Theoretically, if I click on that, then I do. Then you get the bibliographic reference or the address of the archive that manuscript is in, that sort of thing. So the source field is shortened, but you can find quite easily where it's from. Previous source, again, this is important in folk song scholarship because people are often using things collected by other people. So this fella, Frank Purslow, has used things from the G.B. Gardner manuscripts. So you can the idea being that you can trace back where the thing has come from. I also use that field, that's sort of backwards in time, if you like, but I also use that field, I'll show you in a minute, where if it's now available on a website, the website address goes in that field. So you can actually click on it and go to it. That's the theory anyway. Then you've got things like the performer's name, the place name, the date, and the collector. Now, in folk song studies, as most of you know, these are very important things. At least 50% of the people who are using my index want a particular song from a particular place. You know, if you're doing Barbara Allen, the most popular of the child ballads, there's 1,000 versions in here. That's no good to anybody. So you want to narrow it down. I only want the American versions, or I only want the Canadian versions. So all of these fields are searchable and sortable, so you can do that. And just recently, my friend, the website man, has given me this rather nifty thing. Look at that. Now, I couldn't do that with my old shoe boxes, that's for sure. And I mean, a lot of these places I've never even heard of, but that looks pretty accurate to me. And he's also done it for the American ones as well, so you can do that with the American place names. So date the song was collected, the collector, contents. Again, this idea that some people are only looking for versions that have the music. Some people are looking for versions that have the text. So if it's a a fragmentary text, then it will put it there. You know, it would say text in brackets, one verse, which often happens in the collections, or it says music, or it would say audio if it's a sound recording. Then skip down a bit to subjects, where it says apprentice, loves young woman, shady grove, dark and rolling eye, master disapproves. Right. If I was starting again, I would do myself a thesaurus of subject terms, which some of you here are doing. If I, not as easy as it sounds. You can say, I'll do a thesaurus of subject terms. It's quite easy to say, but it's very difficult to do. And in the absence of a subject index, that I can't find a subject index that really helps with folk song. There are lots of subject indexes out there, but they are of other subjects, or they're so general that they don't help, or they are culture specific. Because a subject index in America is not necessarily going to work in Britain. Some of it will, some of it won't. So when I hit a song that I haven't met before, I do just sort of a brief thing like that, which gives you some idea of what it's about, so that when somebody asks me, "Oh, there's that song that mentions Shady Grove, but it's not Shady Grove; it's some other song," then at least I've got some chance of sticking in shady and finding. Because a lot of people who are looking for songs don't quite know what they're looking for. They've heard it. Oh, it's that song my mum used to sing, and it had something about a Shady Grove in the chorus or whatever. Theoretically, what we need is a proper index and all the songs indexed and all the motifs indexed. Now, until that happens, you're stuck with this sort of thing. But you'll be surprised how often that works. And just down the bottom, there's notes. One verse from singer, rest of text from Broadside. In other words, this book has cobbled together that version from different versions. But the most important invention of my life and of this indexing project is the Roud number, which we now talk about, which is there, 1671. Going back to my cards, I soon found that if I had 3 titles for a song, I had to write all 3 titles on all 3 cards. And then if I got another song with a different title, I had to raise another card and go back and write that title on all 4 cards. Now, I soon discovered that this was not a good way of spending my time. It was, and I didn't have any staff, remember, to do it for me. Otherwise, that would have been easier. Just go away and write those cards. So I invented a Roud number. Didn't call it a Roud number, it was just a number. And this was before I'd heard about child, and didn't know anything about child or laws or any other numbering system. Again, if I was starting again, the first 305 of my numbers would be the same as the child numbers. But I didn't know anything about child, so I started with number 1, which happened to be the dark-eyed gypsy countess, what do you call it, Gypsy Davy, you call it, all sort, it's got child number 200, Roud number 1. And then the next one happened to be the unfortunate rake, the streets of Laredo, that sort of corpus. That's number 2. Seeds of Love, which should have been number 1 really, because that was the first song collected by Cecil Sharp. That's number 3, and so on, up to 22,000 now with these numbers. But the idea being that if you want all the versions of this song, The Apprentice Boy, under all the different titles that I've come across it, you just do a search on Roud number 1671, which I hope will work. Right, that was quick, yes. So I got 28 versions of this particular song. There we go, Canadian version in Helen Crichton's book. Simple really, isn't it? you just give things a number, search for the number. But that then brings into the idea of what is the same song. How do you identify ones, you've got 5 texts all about, boy meets girl, boy murders girl, boy gets hanged. That's it's a fairly standard folk song, the murdered sweet. If I had a thesaurus, I'd call it the murdered sweetheart motif, but it's the same thing. But some people will want to bring together all the murdered sweetheart songs, and they don't care which ones they are. Other people want a specific murdered sweetheart song about a particular murder, or a particular mythical murder, as it were. So, should the Roud number refer to things that are definitely the same song because they've got the same words in there, or some of the same words, or should it be sort of more generic? Now, I didn't know anything about this when I started, so I started off with a sort of generic idea. So there are lots of alphabet songs, for instance. I don't know if you know them. There's a lumberman's alphabet, A for axes and B for something, But there's the same song, the sailor's alphabet, which is A for anchors and B for bosuns, and so on, goes through the alphabet. And there are miners' versions. There should be a librarian's version, but I don't think there is. But when I started, I gave all of those the same number because they're all alphabet songs. And you could argue that the text is the same because they all go A, B, C. But the bits that the A's and the B's go with aren't the same. But then people started saying, well, actually, I just want the mining ones. I think the mining ones are different to the lumbering ones, and they are different to the sailors' ones. So I had to renumber my alphabet songs. So if you want alphabet songs, you now have to search for different numbers. But if you want the lumberman's alphabet song, you can go straight to it. And this is the crux of the problems of indexing like this, is that by making it easier for one group of users, the ones who want the specific song, I've made it harder for those who want the generic ones. So there's this constant problem, now that the index is public and I can't just do what I want, of juggling different people's needs, different users, because as a librarian, my concern is to serve my users. The whole thing should be designed so that it can be used. It's no bloody good at all if nobody can use it. So constantly I have to think, okay, who's using my index and what are they after? And this has ramifications for the whole thing. It's not just the Roud number, but if, as I know, that the index is now used by proper researchers, real people with PhDs and, that sort of thing, to do real in-depth research. But it's also used by complete beginners, by students, by people who've just stumbled in and, want to find a song. So we have this continuum of users from, if you like, we'll call them the lower end, but maybe they're the higher end, but the lower end of people who are not serious researchers, people who are performers, people who just want a song, just want to find the words to a song at one end. And at the other end, you've got the people who really do need to know exactly when a song was collected and why it was collected and who collected it and so on. And in between, you've got all sorts of other users. And of course, the same users can slide up and down the scale. I can be a researcher one day, but the next day I just quickly want the words to something because I'm going to sing it tonight or something. So there's this constant juggling for who I'm trying to serve. And of course, I'm being a nice sort of a chap, I want to serve everybody. That's the purpose of it. But that's not always possible. If you go back to the source field, Helen Crichton's book, that's fine. Some people would argue that I should be indexing just the authoritative major sources, right? So, for instance, the Carter family, you all know the Carter family. Yes, I love the Carter family. There is a box set of CDs available in Britain, probably available here by the Bear family, of 5 CDs or something. You know, every song that the Carter family ever recorded. But it costs 150 quid. So I could index that and say, I'm not going to index any more Carter family CDs because I have done the authoritative version. But a few of my users, put it that way, will have the £150 worth of Carter family CDs. But what they will have are the cheap reprints that you can buy in your average shop. You know, that they will have access to the popular rather than to the scholarly. So therefore I have to index the lot. Now with something like the Carter family or Woody Guthrie or Leadbelly, there's a new Woody Guthrie CD out every week. And some of them are going to last, some of them aren't, some of them are going to disappear in 5 minutes. But I feel that I should really index those because those are the things that people have got access to now. It's no good indexing the original 78s alone because nobody else has access to those. So you end up, as I say, trying to cater for so many different groups that sometimes you don't please anybody, sometimes you can hit a happy medium. Then there are interest groups within the folk song world. I mean, for those of you outside the folk song world might think that we're all the same, but we're not. And you know, as soon as the index went up online, and I proudly said, "Oh, it has American stuff on there," and you know, the first email I got was, "Well, you haven't got the hillbilly records." Oh, okay, we better put some hillbilly records on there, you know. Or you haven't got, you know, the shanties. Well, you haven't got this, or you haven't got that. You think, oh, give me a break, I'm doing my best here. But it's true that if it's going to be comprehensive and usable by everybody, as I claim it will be one day, then those groups have just as much right to demand that their particular brand of folk music is on there. And well, you know, why shouldn't it be? So every now and again I sort of have a brainstorm. I think, right, I'm going to do hillbilly records, and so for a few weeks I'm beavering away doing hillbilly records. But then I get an email from the shanty people, and I have to do the shanties. Yeah. No, I don't get on with shanties. Shanties are a problem. Getting back to the Roud numbers. Roud numbers only work if you've got a relatively conservative corpus of material to work from. If somebody 100 years ago sang a song, and the next person sang a song, and the next person sang that song, right, the same song, if they changed things willy-nilly, just decided to change things overnight, the song, by the time it had gone through 3 or 4 generations, would be a completely different song. There'd be hardly any contact between them. But certainly in the British tradition, and I think to a large extent in the American, say in the white American tradition, folk songs singers are basically conservative in that they do more or less sing what they learnt. Now, they do fiddle around with things, they do, and there are good singers and there are bad singers. People forget things, people add things, but not as much as we sometimes think. Most people, I would say, are if you ask them, they would say, oh yes, I sing it the same as Granny did. And they do more or less. But shanties doesn't fit that bill at all. Shanties are much more fluid. And they really did make up things, and they really did combine songs and so on. So the system of numbering for, you know, the sort of Roud system works, as far as I'm concerned, for what, you know, what's to me the main corpus, because that's the, if you like, the Anglo-American white traditions. Doesn't work too well for shanties, and it's pretty hopeless for blues and that sort of thing, because again the songs are too fluid for me to say this is a version of this. Now again, there should be a law that tidies it up, but until there is, really, at the moment, I sort of stay away from blues. There are some blues things in there, but they tend to be the sort of blues ballads, the ones that ever tell a story that I can actually identify and so on. So, as I say, every field has a problem. There's nothing here that is simple. That I thought it was simple when I started, and the real crux of it is, and somebody at the end will ask me this if I don't say it now, how do you define a folk song? And the answer is I don't. I leave it to the collectors to define the folk songs, because really all I'm doing is coming along after the collectors. If a song hasn't been written down or recorded or in some way perpetuated in stone, then I can't index it. If I walk out here, hear somebody singing a song as I walk past, I can't index that performance, really, because nobody can go back to it. I can only index what's been documented. So I don't have to choose what's a folk song. I just have to choose which collections I trust. So Helen Crichton, who did her songs and ballads from Nova Scotia, if she included music hall songs that she had collected from singers, then that to me is good enough. That's a folk song. Now, if I come across a book and they don't tell me where they got their songs from, then I'm in the dark. I don't know whether they're traditional or I don't know if they're folk or not. They might have just been made up the day before. So, in effect, I don't index them in this index. They go into the Broadside Index. And I'll just explain what the Broadside Index does. It's exactly the same format, so that it's interchangeable with the folk song. But that's where I put songs that appeared on, you know what broadsides are? Everybody know broadsides, yes? Chapbooks, songsters, and music hall ditties and early recordings and that sort of stuff. In other words, the songs, the material that the folk song scholars need access to do the history of the folk song. Because one of our problems in folk song scholarship is suddenly somebody pops up with a song and we say, well, that's very nice, but where did it come from? When was the first version? Is it the same as this other one, sort of thing? That's what we do. That's what we're unsure of ourselves if we've got no history. So the Broadside Index, I can throw anything in the Broadside Index because it's not saying that it's an accredited folk song or anything like that. So if you're looking for a particular song, especially if it's a 20th century song or a late 19th century music hall type song, then if you look in the Broadside Index, you'll find references to broadsides, chapbooks, books, recordings, that sort of stuff. I mean, I don't put all pop music in there, obviously. It tends to sort of peter out about 1920. Things went downhill after about 1920. But that's there as a sort of mirror of this, and it works in exactly the same way, although fields like police collected and so on aren't there. But other fields like the author of the song and that sort of thing becomes more important there. Right, that's all of what I'm going to tell you about the index. I just want you to know that I've been working very hard on this for your benefit for all these years. And I would, like a bit of credit for this, please. Right, a few of the things that's happening in England. Now, I'm not talking about Scotland, Ireland and Wales here, I'm just talking specifically about England. English Folk Dance and Song Society, as I say, is an amateur organisation, but that doesn't mean that they do things in an amateur way, especially nowadays. And the library is called the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library. Now, most of you will know that Vaughan Williams was one of our early collectors, also wrote a few symphonies and things, but we like him because he collected songs, 1903 onwards. Also, Cecil Sharp, one of our heroes, although he gets bad press these days, which we might come on to in a moment. But Cecil there. there he is in all his glory. Now, and some of you will know that Cecil Sharp actually came over here and collected I mean, it is one of your important collections, really, isn't it, in the Appalachians, 1915 to 1918. He came over for another reason. He came over to do the music for Midsummer Night's Dream that was on in Broadway, and he was the music director. And I forgot the name of the lady. What's her name? Dame Olive Campbell sought him out and said, I found these rather interesting songs down there in the Appalachians, and Cecil fell through the floor and thought, my goodness, this is better than we got at home, because it's more complete versions, and it's more real than. So he then came back later anyway and collected. One of the important things he did, as you know, he collected the tunes, because he was more interested in the tunes, while your guys were more interested in the words at the time. I mean, broadly speaking, they came from literary backgrounds, he came from a musical background. But one thing that they've now done at Cecil Sharp House is to put Cecil's Appalachian diaries online, if I can remember how to get into them.
There's a link right at
There's
the
a
top.
link. There's a link.
The
right
red,
next to this
his
photo.
diaries can now be.
No,
not-
no.
Where is it? There.
There you go.
That's it. Thank you. There we go. I greeted the new year in bed. Is that the right page?
Yes.
Yes. Pandemonium in the streets of New York. I just come from New York. It's very similar. So here he is in New York, but if you can't cope with his handwriting, I think this is rather nifty. You can you have a transcription, and you also have the links telling you a bit. Oh, sorry. About the people and the places. Now that's something this is a work in progress, like all of these things. People are still being identified and indexed, and so on. So this is one of the things, one of the small things that FTIS has managed to do. And as I say, they're an amateur organisation, but they don't do things in an amateur way these days. They had another project called Take 6. No, which one's Take 6? Oh, don't go to the little arrow. Right, now this I should say that in the realms of folk music and digitization, you guys were there long before us with your American Memory project. Your websites are excellent. I mean, they really are, and they're still better than we're doing now, and they've been up there for 10 years, something like that. Yeah, so I have to hand it to you that you're stuck, but we could do with some more, please. Because that was a good start, but we want some more. This was a project to take 6 of the major collections. You may notice that there are 7 of them there, but we'll worry with that in a minute. And to digitize the manuscripts, so this is working on manuscripts rather than sound recordings. So the second one, the chap with the debonair chap with the pipe, that's George Butterworth. You might know him as he was a classical composer, but was killed in the First World War, so didn't get very far in his career. But he was one of Cecil Sharp's Morris dancers and collectors and so on. And there he is. We search the catalogues. So again, you can search for songs. So if you know your round numbers, which some of them I do, you can search for 558, which is the Foggy Dew, which was the one I was trying to find in the first place. Okay, so there are 2 versions in the Janet Blunt collection, several in the George Gardner collection, and so on. And if we choose one at random, that gives you the details, and then you get the original field notebooks and music and so on. So this is for that particular song. Hammond apparently did not note a text from this singer. Fine, okay. But what he did write was usual words. I mean, that's what a lot of the collectors did that. Fair enough. You know, the poor chaps were out there with pen and pencil and their bicycles and things. But this is rather neat in that, although any archivists in the audience might disagree with me here, we took the decision to bring together things from different parts of the collection. George Gardner is a good example in that he went out with his notebook, but he wasn't confident enough to note the music, so he had a musician with him. So he noted the words, and then he went back home and he wrote them out in his best handwriting. The musician he had with him did the same, did the music, came back, wrote it out. So you've already got 4 pieces of paper referring to that one singer singing that one song. Sometimes the musician went back, or George went back to check the words or the music. Sometimes the repeat visit was with a different musician. So you can get 8 pieces of paper. And then after that somebody came and transcribes the whole lot and typed out the words. You can get 10 pieces of paper. Now, if I was a proper archivist, which I'm not, I'm a librarian, so I can do what I like. Archivists tend to like to keep their collection in the right order, so George's notebooks are there, and then his texts are there, and then somebody else's words are there, and so on. So if we digitize them, they all appear in different places. So if you're looking for that song collected from that singer on that day, you either have to ferret around all the place, or we have to do all these links. So what we decided to do was to bring them together. So you search for a particular song, and as in that case there, you had all 3 bits of paper for that song collected from that person on that day, all together. Now, I think that's a sensible thing to do, because we know that 90% at least of people using this website are looking for specific songs. They're not looking for how did George Gardner go about collecting, or what was he doing on a particular day. They're looking for a particular song. So my job as a librarian is to cater for that need and pull the stuff together. So that's the way we did it. But of course the first complaints we got was, you can't browse the collection. People said, what I want to do, I don't want to search for a song, I want to start from page 1 and work your way through. And we say, well, actually you don't really want that. If you could see page 1 and page 2, page 3, they are almost unintelligible. You'd soon give up. You'd get up to page 10 and you'd give up. But that's what some people want. Some people want to browse. Now we designed I wasn't the designer here. Malcolm Taylor was the designer, but I helped. We designed things for searching rather than browsing. So when the next update of this project, which I'll tell you about in a moment, happens, then we will have another, browsers go this way, searchers go that way, and hopefully we can sort everybody out. Now, Take 6 had 6 collections. Since then, one project down in Devon has done the same thing with the Baring Gould. You may not have heard of Sabin Baring Gould was a parson and a squire in Devon. He was one of our earliest collectors. He was also a novelist, and he wrote Onward Christian Soldiers. Onward Christian Soldiers, him, yes. Anyway, quite a sort of. He had 13 children, I think, and couldn't quite remember their names, but who can? But with Baring Gould, because it was done by different people, although to our template, they actually did the thing separately. So you got the Foggy Dew by Baring Gould there, B, and the Foggy Dew tune only, and the Foggy Dew A, and another Foggy Dew A because he copied it out into another book. Now he probably only collected it once, or maybe twice, but you've got all these different headings for, in effect, the same thing. So again, that's good for the browsers. They can go through page by page, but it's not good for the searchers. But the really really exciting thing from our point of view is that FDIS have just got a grant from the Heritage Lottery Fund. Do you have such things over here? You have lotteries, right? Yeah. Now the lottery is it's a commercial lottery, but when it was set up fairly recently, some of the money from the lottery goes into good causes. So it's not actually a government grant. The lottery does its own decision making, and often it's £5 million to buy a Rubens that would be leaving the country, or to do up a castle or something. I mean, it is England after all. But Malcolm Taylor at FDIS has worked very hard to get £500,000 to digitise all the other major collections, folk song collections in England. Again, as I say, not Scotland, Ireland and Wales. And as from later this year, that project will be going ahead, including Cecil Sharp and his American, his Appalachian collecting, all his pages of songs. The original manuscripts will be there. They'll be indexed, they'll be Roud numbered, all of the paraphernalia that goes with it. And also, I've forgotten to bookmark it, but if you go to their site, you can see the photographs that Sharp took of his singers. There's some wonderful pictures from the Appalachians, 1916 of the singers. They're already up there, in fact, the photos. So the future, in a way, from folk song studies in England, we're entering a sort of golden era, because these collections, they've been available before, but if you wanted to see the Cecil Sharp collection, you'd go to Cambridge. If you wanted to see Frank Kidson's collection, it's in Glasgow. In other words, you have to be a gentleman scholar like myself with all the time in the world and all the money in the world to actually do it. But for the first time ever, all these collections will be in one place and available to everybody. One other sort of strand to what we're doing is in Broadside. Broadside research. We mention broadsides because if you're doing the history of folk song, you bump into broadsides in England especially very quickly. They're the only way you can date most songs is if the thing was in print at any time. So if Cecil Sharp collected the song in 1903, that's fine, but you don't know anything about it unless you've got some printed source. So broadsides are the important thing. And there's lots of collections. Now the Bodleian Library have pioneered, if you like, the broadside digitization projects. So again, you can do right. So again, we have now access to the 30,000 broadsides in the Bodleian, and wonderful resource it is. Now, obviously, I don't have any say at the Bodleian, so they didn't put Roud numbers on this index. But it works the other way around. That if I've found a song in the Bodleian in my index, you just click on a field, and it would take you directly to this site. And really, that's the future for my index. Is that some people say that once everything's digitised and up on the web, you don't need indexes like mine, and it's true in a way. You can search on Google for Barbara Allen. You might get 3 million hits, which is not really much good to you, and you won't know which ones of those you're interested in, and so on. My point of view is that the more stuff is available, the more you need people to do the indexing to bring it together and to give you shortcuts and to, say if you're interested in folk song, then if you go through my index, you may still get 1,000 hits, but that's better than 3 million. And you'll know that that 1,000 is in some way connected to being traditional or collected or on the broadside. You see what I mean? I've said, of all that information, I'm going to index this little bit. If you're interested in this little bit, come via my index rather than via Google. But indexes are really rather old-fashioned. You know, my index, you find that it's in Crichton's book. You then have to go and find Crichton's book. Now, I've got it on my shelf because I collect that sort of thing, but most of you may not. Most of you don't work here. In other words, it's a sort of 2 or 3 step information thing. Now, you might if you then Google Crichton's book, you might find it on the web. What needs to happen is that my index has to be more interactive and more interconnected with the digital world, in the same way as I'm doing with the broadside ballads, for instance. Because that's there and because I have access to it, if I find it on there, I can just stick a link in, and I know that the Bodleian site's going to be there next week. That one of the problems is that if you don't know it's going to be there. So I mean that's the future when I get round to it, is to throw away the 5x3 cards in the shoe boxes and get into the 21st century. And there's no reason, I mean, the stuff that's out of copyright, if somebody is willing to host my index with the images, there's no reason why I can't scan the image as well as indexing it. I mean, it's another few minutes, but it saves the user a lot of time, and that's what an index is for, to save the user a lot of time. So that's it. That's dead on 1 o'clock. Yeah.
Time for a few questions.
Time for questions.
I'll hand out I'll do your handout
Yes.
while you're answering.
I think there are only
Yes.
20 copies, so just
There's-
take one if you really.
There's two pages there. That just gives the websites that I've been talking, and some others that I didn't have time to cover. But if you want them electronically, you can email me and I can send you the list. If you don't want to type in all the squiggles and things. Now, yes, Steve.
I'm wondering whether the index, and this is something I've never sort of noticed in looking through it, deals with unpublished archival resources at all.
Yes.
It does, okay. In the sense that the Creighton, for example, that you showed, of Ben Henneberry singing The Foggy Dew, I'm reasonably sure we have the field recording, a copy of the field recording on which that was based in our archive, and there would be another copy in Nova Scotia.
Yes.
And are those in the index?
They are. Some of them are. I mean, the situation now is that when this project with FDIS has happened, and if I index at the same time as their catalog, well, I'll be doing the cataloguing to a certain extent. So when that's done, so say 18 months' time, 2 years' time, virtually all the English manuscripts and books and field recordings that aren't in private hands will be indexed. So England, done. Right? If you look at the American holdings on my index, if it's in a published book, it's more or less likely to be in there. I've done most of the state collections, most of the Helen Crichton's, so USA and Canada. But for the unpublished collections, if I've been able to persuade the librarians to send me a Xerox copy, for a small collection, for instance, then the whole thing's in there. The Beck, E.C. Beck collector, his stuff's there because I can get hold of it at home. In other words, if I get access to it, I can do it. Now, one of the things, once the English project is out the way, I'd like to come back to doing more American stuff, because most of my users are American, probably. And I'd like to make sure that I've got your stuff here on there, because there's no point in not doing it.
Are you doing the James Madison Carpenter collection
Yes.
right now?
Yeah, forgot to mention him. James Madison Carpenter collection, which is here, but it does have American stuff in it, but the most important material in there from our point of view is that he collected in Britain in the 1930s, and he made recordings in the 1930s which nobody else was doing on dictaphone. So there are thousands of songs in that collection, which I'm gradually adding it. Now there is this index up that I can check things. Then within a year or so, the Madison collection will be there as well. But certainly, as a researcher, obviously the manuscript is more important than the secondary book. But most of my users want to get to the book first, as it were. Hello.
Can I sneak in 2 questions?
Yes.
Reading me. First off, as an independent researcher, I find that when I approach librarians with a brilliant idea to do an index, they're, kind of like, uh-oh. How did you convince people that this was worthy and get the sort of cooperation you got?
Just by trial and error, I think. Just by it being there and people starting to say, "Oh, this is neat. This is useful." I mean, to give them their due, at the Vaughan Williams Library, Malcolm Taylor, who's been there for over 30 years now, when I first took the index into him on floppy disks and he loaded it up, and he immediately saw that it was useful. He said, "This is just what we need, because people come in here asking for a song and you've indexed things. We don't have to do any more indexing," he said. And so he encouraged me to develop it and to keep at it, as it were. And he, in England, he is a key person. If you convince Malcolm of something, then you're halfway there, sort of thing.
And second question, have you made any attempt to sort of trace tune families, something like the Star of the County Down?
Ah, right, yes. No, is the answer. You can't. I'm not a musician anyway, so I'm not qualified to do the tunes. But I don't think you can do tunes in the same way as you can texts. You can get 2 texts together and say, well, it's 50% the same words, it's 60% the same words. So whatever, I'm going to have a cut-off at, say, at 60%, so that's the same song. You know what I mean? You can't do that with tunes, really. There are too many variables there. A text means something. You can read it and everybody understand what it means. You can argue about what it means, but it means something. Whereas a tune doesn't mean something. A tune is a tune. I'm not saying the right words, but you get what I mean. If somebody can come up with a proper system for identifying, comparing, and labelling tunes, then I'd more than happily put in a reference in my index. But I can't at the moment. The only thing I can do is if there is a named tune, like Greensleeves or something, and the broadside says sung to the tune of Greensleeves, then I put in Greensleeves. But that's best I can do.
There's an Irish tune motif index, I think, put out by, was it Garland or, I can't remember.
Yes.
But they exist,
They exist, but
not for English folk song.
not for English, and also, I mean, I'm not sufficiently musical to say whether they work or not, but I'm told that none of the systems that exist at the moment are very good.
Maybe one more question and then inform us.
Yes.
So I was thinking what you were saying about linking more to the web. Creighton's book is 1932, so probably you can't get to the full text in Google Books or Happy Trust or whatever, copyright issues, but any of the child collections or something you probably can get to. We make great use of unpaid labor here, interns, student interns, and it seems to me that that's a pretty manageable project to have some student go through and find the links to which books have been digitized and are freely available.
Yes.
And that's a pretty concrete, easy project.
Yes, so you're right. And as part of the new project that FDIS are doing, which is called the Full English Project. I don't know if you know. Full English means a full English breakfast. Really, in a bed. If you go to a hotel and have the full English, then you have the whole thing. So it's a fairly sort of neat title, Full English. As part of that, I'm hoping that I can scrounge some help to do exactly that, to put in links to material that's there, as long as it's stable, because I've come unstuck in the past of spending lots of time linking to things that disappear. And there's nothing more annoying than links that don't work. So nowadays things are more stable than they used to be. But as I said right at the beginning, the trouble with a long-term project like this is you've always got your history on your back, as it were, the baggage of old programs, and the way you do this is because 20 years ago you couldn't do it otherwise, whereas nowadays we can do more or less what we want in database terms. But not so long ago, you had to worry about the length of the fields, and you couldn't put letters into a number field, and all of that sort of stuff it was a major constraint. Sorry, I wandered off the topic there, but yeah, in answer to your question, yes, I hope so.
Great. Please join me in thanking Steve Roud for coming today. Our next Vaughan lecture will be May 5th, where we're having Professor Don Yoder, come to talk about Pennsylvania Dutch culture. Please join us then, and look for this to go up on the web in the not too distant future. Thank you for coming.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.